With your host, Andrew Donaldson. This is Heard Tell.
Hi, welcome back to Heard Tell. Okay, she's become one of our favorites for a lot of reasons. One is she's unique. The other reason is she's unique. We really like her. Amanda Griffiths is back on the program. She's got a lot of letters after her names, but mostly she's just real smart. How are you, Amanda? Great to talk to you again.
I'm doing wonderfully. How about yourself, Andrew?
Fantastic. It was good meeting you in person. That was fun. And a lot of our other friends. Let's talk a little elections, though. You wrote in Real Clear Politics. Here's my deal. Let's just go big picture before we get into the minutia here a little bit and what you wrote. I'm an actions, not words guy. We've had a couple of elections with contention here now. I don't believe anybody really cares about fixing any of the inherent problems in the election system because we would have fixed them between the last couple of elections and we just keep doing it over and over again. Am I wrong?
I am not just the past couple of elections. I mean, we'd have fixed them a long time ago. There are real issues that have to do with election integrity and that have to do with voter access and in particular candidate access, which redounds to voters. If you have a candidate that's representative of a voter base that can't access a ballot, for instance, then you've got voters who are being shut out of voicing their representative preference. So yeah, of course, we would have fixed this a long time ago if it mattered to fix it, but really it's just a talking point. And it's one of those things that back and forth between our generally bipartisan system or duopolistic system, you have both sides that will continue to bray about how the other side is stealing elections, the other side is playing dirty, and we all hear this talk about saving democracy. What's interesting is no one actually stops and bothers to say what they mean by democracy. So that's where it gets a little bit murky. And I think that's where we're allowed to not fix the real problems because we haven't defined what the problem is affecting.
Yeah, and if we fix the problem, then we can't complain that the problem exists to our mailing list and our fundraising base, which is what's happening with a lot of this right now. Let's just be adults here. Election denialism or whatever you want to call it, there's good business there. There's good fundraising there. And there's a reason these people that can get close and not win, they file court injunctions at certain times. They have certifications at certain times. They know how to do it without legally getting in trouble. This is a business now inside the political realm. Let's just call it what it is.
For sure. I mean, consultants, pundits, politicians, they'll make a lot of money talking about stolen elections. And I want to point out that every cycle, it's whatever party is sort of the most scared of losing power. So this particular cycle, the Democrats were very scared of losing their grip, of losing their majority. And you actually saw Hillary Clinton put out this fundraising video talking about how in 2024 they were planning a coup, that the Republican, this MAGA fascistic base was planning this coup. And let's see, she's actually got an initiative now called Crush the Coup, which sounds suspiciously like Stop the Steal, doesn't it?
Yeah, see, sloganeering always does it when you do that, especially when you project out and we don't even know who the candidates are going to be, although we can kind of guess. Amanda Griffiths joining us. You touch on a couple of things here. You touch on one thing that I actually struggle. Look, let's just do some grown folk talk here. I struggle with this particular part that you touched on your base. What do we do with long shot candidates from either third parties or independents that make it on the ballot? They do everything they're supposed to do, and we'll talk about ballot access in a minute. You also touch on that. I struggle with this because at one point I'm like, yeah, if they cover their bases, they do everything right, they get on the ballot. But I also understand the argument of like, look, we got two people that can win and a couple percentage point. Look, I've got a friend of mine in West Virginia won her House of Delegates seats by 56 votes. Okay.
Mhm.
These things really matter when you get a tight race and you've got two people that are clearly ahead and you can have somebody playing the spoiler role. You talk about both sides of it, that it's a part of democracy, but there is a spoiler role involved. What do we do with that? Because I struggle with that one. I'm not sure what exactly to do with that sometimes because it kind of crosses a couple different streams.
Well, nobody likes a spoiler, especially when you've got a candidate for whom you're rooting, right? And do you think that the spoiler is just there to steal votes? Well, that's difficult, right? That the spoiler is just there to sabotage your guy. This recently happened very publicly in Georgia with the Georgia runoff between Walker and Warnock. There was a libertarian named Chase Oliver who got about 2% of the Georgia vote. And then Georgia, of course, went to a runoff. Now, was it Georgia's, or rather, was it Chase Oliver's fault that we had this runoff and that we had this runoff election? Absolutely not. No one would have heard of Chase Oliver. No one would have voted for Chase Oliver if Chase Oliver hadn't been offering some sort of alternative that neither Walker nor Warnock were able to provide. So what needs to happen when you see what these so-called spoiler candidates is both parties that are part of the more major party system, Republicans, Democrats, need to take a look and ask, what is so appealing about this figure? What's so appealing about this figure that is getting people to deviate from either my team or the other guy's team, or come out for the first time and take away, so it's, that's the viewpoint, take away some of my votes that I'm trying to court. And when Republicans and Democrats do this right, as they have, what you see happening is they do get a lot of that other more so-called independent base, third party base coming over. When Republicans or Democrats take on some part of that other party's platform. Republicans have done that or tried to do that with immigration. Democrats have been very successful doing this with marijuana legalization. And I'm speaking in terms of libertarians here, but obviously we can talk about Green Party. We can even talk about Democratic Socialist. I have no idea whether I would have voted for this third party candidate. But what I can tell you is that, and it doesn't matter whether we're talking about a Jill Stein, whether we're talking about a Bernie Sanders, whether we're talking about a Gary Johnson, if enough people had been satisfied with either major party candidate, you wouldn't have a problem. So I don't understand how libertarians and all these third party candidates are huge jokes until they take a little percentage of the vote to which you think you were entitled, and all of a sudden they are election saboteurs and thieves of democracy, which last I checked required a little something called pluralism.
Yeah, Amanda Griffiths joining us. Okay, so the counter argument is going to be, well, they've got built-in disadvantages, and there's truth to that. You touched on it. This Tennessee example that you used, we've talked about this one on the show. This is one of the more egregious ones where major party Republican Democrats, they need 25 signatures for a ballot, but any kind of an independent or third party needs 56,000. That's a little more egregious than most places have, but it is true. There is access thing. Now, I don't think we need 80 people on the ballot every time we have an election. What's a reasonable standard here? Does it, there's not going to be a rise of a major third party anytime soon. Sorry, libertarian fans. You guys got to have an adult convention before you get that status. But what's a reasonable gatekeeping here that it doesn't waste the public's time and the public's money, but it also makes elections more accessible? Find me some middle ground here somewhere, something common sense.
Sure, and we should have standards, right? I don't think there should be a free for all. I shouldn't just be able to climb on a ballot and run for office. So there's a group in Tennessee called For All Tennessee, and their website is, and no, I don't work for them, they're not paying me, for the FORALLTN.org. And they have a bunch of fantastic ballot proposals where they basically say, we just want to bring this a little bit more into line. We want to be able to have, let's say, a smaller percentage of people perhaps supporting a candidate, perhaps polling for a candidate, smaller percentage of signatures on the ballot, or sorry, that on canvassing, that is more commensurate with what is required to get a Republican or a Democrat on the ballot. That's all normal. We can look at perhaps fundraising numbers. We can have a lot of redundancy built in. So several different standards from which you can pick and choose. One particularly strange, and this is not a public forum, this is more private, but with the debate system, this is particularly strange the way that this is run. Now this is when we talk about the bipartisan debates, these political debates. The people who coordinate these, essentially they will say, well, you have to score a certain percentage of favorability. You have to have a certain favorability rating in national polls. But what they qualify as a national poll is any one of the 5 major network news polls. So you're already limiting the number of people who can even respond to this poll. So you're already narrowing the base from which you can draw when you're trying to gauge how popular is a given candidate. These are the types of things that are very, very old rules that shouldn't really apply anymore. And yeah, when we're talking about ballot access, particularly with Tennessee. So yes, right now you need 25 signatures to run if you're a Republican, 25 to run if you're a Democrat, 25 to run, weirdly, if you're a registered independent, but 56,082 if you're a third party. I don't really understand the difference between third party and independent, but the problem with just declaring oneself an independent, if you're part of a legitimate third party, is that then you are abdicating a little bit of your ability to make voters immediately aware what you stand for. Is there an L next to your name? Is there a G next to your name? Is there a DSA next to your name? That I isn't going to say much. And so we need to rework these standards that have to do, so that they're a little bit more in line with prior voting history, with signatures, all of that.
Yeah, Amanda Griffiths joining us. You talk about things like signatures. You talk about things like canvassing. These are nuts and bolts of politics that we don't talk about because they don't trend. We've gotten to where now, social media people like their little election maps and things like that. And that's great because that raises awareness. I think it does have an educational value to it. But the nuts and bolts of elections don't get talked about enough. And this is one of those things where the letters of the law really matter and we don't focus on it, like the thing in Tennessee. I bet you a lot of people in Tennessee don't even know that exists. I bet most voters probably don't know what the ballot access requirements in their municipalities are for local, state, and federal elections, and that all 3 of those can be very different in the exact same voting area. These things are really complicated. How do we raise the education level towards the election nuts and bolts, things like that, like how to get on a ballot, how people qualify so they don't just get stuck up with, oh, this person should run for office, and you wind up with a candidate that's unqualified or otherwise unworthy. This seems like an important piece of education for an informed electorate to have. How do we get there?
I feel like Ben Sass now. And we just go back to civics class. We need Schoolhouse Rock. We need a Schoolhouse Rock song.
But who's going to
about
teach it? Not to cut you off, but my dad was a teacher, and he always said the problem with student teachers is they're going to become teachers, because he taught a lot of the student teachers. And like, the problem with these students is sometimes they're going to be teachers. Like, there's a trickle down effect to something being bad. It's like the people now don't know how to do it. How are they going to teach somebody else something they don't know?
And I just
not to be a
submitted
cynic,
final.
but that's
I just submitted final grades too, so I feel personally attacked right now as a student teacher. But yeah, no, you're absolutely.
Didn't say I was wrong.
You're absolutely right that it is difficult, and I mean, you can't just kick it a civics class, but part of it is that there are policy changes, and the policy changes can raise awareness a little bit. So again, we'll go back to For All Tennessee, because you said correctly, Andrew, Tennessee is one of the most egregious examples of ballot access disproportionality in the country. So what For All Tennessee proposes is that, first of all, they propose reducing the retention requirement to keep ballot access from 5% of votes in a statewide race to 1% of votes for third party or minor party candidates. Anything that you do that is going to allow for greater access to ballots, for voters to feel more represented by a greater swath of people, and to voice the fact that they have this representative alternative. Anything you do there is automatically going to make people care more about it. And yes, we do need fewer signatures. 0.5% of the votes in the last governor's race, say, if we've got gubernatorial candidates. Right now, it's 2.5%. So that can be curtailed, that can be cut down. And this would also lower the cost to taxpayers. So again, I'm reading directly now from the For All Tennessee website. Tennessee law states that any party who achieves over 5% must participate in a taxpayer-funded primary. And this bill actually increases that threshold to 25%, which reduces the cost, makes it more difficult for all candidates to get in that taxpayer-funded primary. So once again, just making it a more level playing field. And once again, this differential between the label independent and label third party, I think we need to do away with entirely, because when you look now at polling numbers, we actually have a plurality of people. More people than Republicans or Democrats are now saying, more voters are now saying, I don't align with either party. Now, maybe they're saying I'm a libertarian. Maybe they're saying I'm Green Party. Maybe they're saying I am independent. Maybe they're saying I'm a socialist. We don't know. But people are saying I am X, and they're getting lumped into this category called independent. I'll tell you what, Justin Amash is not the same type of independent as Bernie Sanders, is not the same type of independent as Jill Stein. So when we talk about how a plurality of Americans now are actually independent voters, I'd like to think all Americans are independent voters. We need to be defining what that means, not just third party, not this thing that I know or think that I understand, but rather, okay, what do they stand for? And then what do they believe in? And then major parties can look at that and say, well, how do we integrate some of these popular initiatives into our platforms? That's what a successful postmortem does.
Yeah, Amanda Griffiths. Postmortem, premortem, if you're going to defend democracy, you need to understand at least how it works.
Yes.
And we seem to be failing that standard right now. Amanda, always enjoy talking to you. Let folks know where they can follow you. We're going to link to this piece so everybody can find it. Let folks know how they can follow and keep up with all the very many things you're doing, because you're all over the place nowadays.
I try, well, and physically too, geographically, my gosh, traveling and moving. People can find me on the twitter.com at AjaxTheGriff, AjaxTheGriff. And I have just found out that I have progressed from being a Young Voices contributor to a Young Voices writer. So I will be writing for the wonderful organization Young Voices or I think is it .org or .com now? They keep
We're an
changing it.
org.
We're on org. All right.
We're a nonprofit. We're an org.
So you could check out my page, youngvoices.org. You can see all the media hits and all the articles that I've been working on. I always love to talk. So you go follow me on Twitter, and I'm working on getting the Instagram down, but that's a work in progress. So we'll see.
You can have at that Instagram. I'm going to stick with Twitter to the bitter end. Amanda Griffiths, our very good friend, Young Voices contributor, doing exciting stuff, including a cross-country move somewhere in here in her many travels.
To Madison, my friends.
In the wintertime. Good luck.
I lived in Chicago. It's all right. I'm battle hardened. I'm somewhere in here. I've got reserves. So.
I did Chicago and DC in back-to-back weeks, and it was colder in DC, so I must have got lucky. Amanda Griffiths, we so appreciate you. Also going to have you on the long-form podcast back. We're going to talk some more communism and classicalism and some other great stuff. You're the best, my friend. Thanks for coming back.
You're wonderful, Andrew, and happy holiday season to you and your listeners.
You too. We'll talk soon. Bye. Welcome back to Heard Tell. Okay, he's returning. He's out in Utah. He does comms and stuff. Talks a lot about conservation and environmental things. Micah Safsten, how are you, sir? Great to have you back on the program.
Doing well, Andrew. Good to be back.
Great to have you back. Okay, I like to start with just base stuff when we talk. And I don't mean base like the kids use it, because I still don't understand what is and isn't base these days. I just mean like bases and foundational. Okay, you've been writing about the cultivated meat, not plant-based meat.
Right.
I'm not against the idea. I like the idea. I understand the concept. I think the concept even has a noble goal for what it's worth, that, what they're trying to accomplish. At the same time, I think we're getting a little carried away with this. We have thousands and thousands of years of human data on how to do good animal husbandry. We have good data on what is and isn't sustainable farming and sustainable agriculture and sustainable raising of food products via animals. We know what works and doesn't work. Why are we banging our head against the wall when it comes to things like plant-based meat and acting like it has to be either or here?
Well, what's definitely the case is that traditional animal husbandry, traditional agricultural practices, they do have quite a toll, and they are very inefficient compared to the other foods that we eat. Any other, our fruits and vegetables are far more efficient when it comes to calories in and calories out. And so that is certainly like something I think we do need to take seriously. The fact that 25 calories for 1 calorie of beef, that's pretty high. And so and then when you look at the methane emissions and the costs it has on just the land that animals are grown upon, and then something I write a lot about is water use, and we have to feed these animals. These animals that we eat, we have to feed them something, so we have to grow plants that they eat that we don't consume at all. And so it is very inefficient. So it's ripe for innovation. And so I applaud anyone who's looking to innovate in this area. But a lot of people are doing it the wrong way, looking at the wrong things, these plant-based meats.
Micah Safsten joining us. Let's just get right to the brass tacks of it. This is a business thing. They are doing this not only for altruistic reasons, but this is a growing business sector. People want to, either because of dietary reasons, religious reasons. Some people want to be, vegetarian or vegan for whatever reason. That's fine. They should have options. But this is a business model. Right now, this is a very expensive business model, and that's part of the discussion that we're having when we get into how this is getting into the market penetration, source like that. You just can't get around the cost of this at the moment, can you?
No, that's right. There's a lot of money in it. In agriculture, particularly meat production, it's something like four meat packing companies control a majority of the industry. And that, like I said, it's ripe for innovation and ripe for disruption.
You wrote about this in Real Clear Energy. We're going to link to the piece. You made an interesting comparison here between the plant-based meats, the impossible meats, these things, whatever you want to call them, and televisions.
Right. So it is something of a leap there. So what I'm actually comparing is cultivated meats, not plant-based meats. So plant-based meats are I call them high-tech veggie burgers. They're not veggie burgers that you would usually think of. Veggie burgers traditionally made with like you take a bite and there's like a bean in there. Plant-based meats are like these impossible meats, and they're not good. I've had them, and they're not good. And some people disagree with me, but most people do not. But what I was comparing to televisions was cultivated meat, which is different than both veggie burgers and plant-based meats. Cultivated meat is meat that is grown in a lab. It is in terms of its chemical makeup indistinguishable from traditional meat. It's made with proteins, lipids, the same things that make up, the beef that we eat: beef, chicken, pork. And how they do it is they take a small biopsy of a living animal, so we'll say a cow, and they then take that, and I've read that it's often the size of a sesame seed, and they literally put that in enzymes, and they form meat out of it, and it grows in a lab, and it's very expensive, something like between $2,400 a pound. I mean, that's just absurd. There's no way you can bring that to market. But the point I make about the televisions is that in the year 2000, a 50-inch flat screen TV cost $20,000. Today, a 50-inch flat screen TV costs about $250. And that price reduction came over time as early adopters, eccentric, wealthy people, investors, they invest in this product and allow it to scale. And my point was that while cultivated meat is prohibitively expensive, there is time for it to scale, and it just needs to be given the opportunity to scale. And my claim is that cultivated meat is a better answer than impossible meat because of that. Impossible meat is far less expensive, but it's unpalatable. Cultivated meat has the potential of being palatable, and that has the potential of being affordable.
Yeah, Micah Safsten joining us. What about, you just mentioned it, the impossible stuff has a bad reputation with some folks, earned, not earned. I understand some people like it, but that's
Right.
okay. Some people don't understand the greatness of ketchup and cheese on a hot dog too. There's wrong people walking the earth. That's what I like. Sorry. But like I just did, I mixed the two up. Is there going to be a barrier here because the one became before the other, and it's having some issues in the market, at least getting stereotyped, if nothing else? I think that's a fair way to put it. If it's getting stereotyped a certain way, now the cultivated's coming. You just had to explain it to me for 4 or 5 minutes. That's going to be a barrier to the marketplace besides just the price, right?
I think that's exactly right. People will, as cultivated meat does become more available as it scales up, there will be an association of cultivated meat with impossible meat, or plant-based meat, really. And I think that I hope that as more people are able to actually try it, that challenge will be overcome. And I think it can. I hope it can. I'll admit, I've never tried cultivated meat. I can't afford a $600 hamburger. But I'm confident that the market is able to produce something that is equivalent and possibly even better than a traditional hamburger using cultivated meat. And that, to me, makes more sense to as a way to solve some of the challenges and the emissions that agriculture takes on the planet, rather than these plant-based alternatives, which are just not good. And it kind of comes back to this point that I often find myself coming back to, that we don't have to sacrifice every good thing in our life to solve some of the environmental problems that we have around us. And often the solutions actually don't involve those sacrifices at all. And this is an example of that.
Yeah, Micah Safsten joining us. Okay, we talked about the cost. We talked about the science of it. There's a big cultural component here. Let's just be honest about this thing. Like, I'm a big foodie. I'm all for market innovation. I'm for progress. I understand the problems that we're trying to solve here. At the same time, me, human being, Andy, I grew up in a culture. I'm from West Virginia. It's a big hunting thing. Like, to this day, they get a week off for Thanksgiving. It's not for Thanksgiving, it's for deer season, but they put Thanksgiving because nobody would believe that you get a week off for deer season. But you got to, because nobody's coming to school. Hunting and fishing culture. Kill it, process it, eat it. That's just kind of ingrained. Even people that don't hunt anymore live it. It's just kind of an ingrained thing, especially in the American culture of eating meat. Now, I understand, again, people have religious reasons or moral reasons. I completely respect people that have moral reasons over not wanting, the slaughter of animals. I get it. Look, I've been on the kill floor at Smithfield plant. I get it. That can make anybody a vegetarian. I understand it. At the same time, foodie me, cultural, there's a lot of people that probably feel that way to some degree of like, look, meat comes from an animal and that's that. Otherwise, you should never call it meat. We've seen this with the milk debate of labeling milk and oat milk and things like this. That's a cultural part of this argument besides the policy that you're going to have to handle, right?
That's exactly right. And hunting is an interesting rebuttal, because hunting, I don't think it could be said that hunting is nearly as a drastic effect on the environment as traditional agriculture does. And so, and I certainly don't want to prevent anyone from hunting. And I also don't think that traditional agriculture will ever completely go away, nor do I think it should. When you really look at what these companies are able to do with the cultivated meat, it really the best they can do right now is basically replicating ground beef or chicken and or pork, and a lot of the high quality cuts of meat can't replicate that. And maybe someday they will, but they can't right now. And for that reason, just that reason alone, traditional agriculture is certainly here to stay to some extent or another. But when you look at the scale of traditional agriculture today, there's a lot of room. There's a lot of trimming the fat, no pun intended, that can occur, that can really take the burden off of the environment, and while at the same time maintaining a supply to meet the demand for meat. And that's really what I'm looking for, is to have kind of a diversified world, and when it comes to where we get our meat from. And we could hunt, we could have traditional agriculture, but then we also have new option. And maybe plant-based meats will improve, and maybe someday those will become appetizing. But I'm less confident in that. I'm more confident in the cultivated meat.
Yeah, Micah Safsten joining us. You just brought it up, so let's discuss that part of it, though, is how do we make this into a thing where it's an all of the above and not an either or, like we kind of started with? Because what happens is somebody will get on like the Impossible Burger, or they'll get onto the cultivated meat. You can see the potential there, and like, oh well, this will just completely replace the other thing. So let's tilt the scales in favor of this with regulation or so on and so forth and thing. I don't think that's the right way to go here, because again, if we can innovate in the making of meat, there's been great innovation in the way we raise and process and do animal husbandry and animal processing for meat and for foodstuffs. You can innovate that as well, just like we can innovate agriculture. We can innovate in all the areas at the same time and raise all boats here. How do we do that so that it doesn't become this dangling thing of like, oh, we're just going to get rid of all this other thing where, again, American privilege, maybe America can do that in a couple other countries. Poor countries need their animal husbandry to survive, but to survive. How do we prevent that conversation going off the rails like we've seen with some other innovations when it's come to environmental things, where you start leaving the developing world behind and even start causing harm to it?
I mean, it's kind of a cliche answer, but I think competition is really kind of a key, is allowing for these different meat sources to compete with each other. I mentioned earlier, there's something like 4 major meat packing companies in the world that control something like 75% of all meat production. You mentioned Smithfield Foods, Tyson, JBS is another one. I can't remember the last one, but that's not very much competition. We need to find policies that will allow for greater competition, and that actually means, to a great degree, deregulating a lot of the traditional agricultural operations, and allowing for more competition from smaller producers. Now, initially, that will actually probably harm the environment at first, because as you open up traditional agriculture, you're opening up, the potential for more environmental impacts. But I think in the long term, you then are incentivizing innovation, and this cultivated meat is the perfect example of that innovation. So we need to and that's really what competition does, is it incentivizes innovation, and that's what we don't see that very much in agriculture today. Not just in meat, but also in crop growth. There's very little competition. There's very little innovation, and a lot of that stems for how we treat our water. Our water is often subsidized, and that's the most important resource that goes into agriculture. And so these things all kind of run together.
Yeah, Micah Safsten. One of the reasons for that, and you just kind of hinted at it, there's been great consolidation in agriculture, both in animal agriculture and food agriculture. Bigger and bigger companies are taking up more and more of it. There's less mom and pops. There's less family-run farms, things like that. That's been the trend for several years. There's a lot of reasons for that. So we have this massive consolidation of traditional agriculture down to one. By its definition, something that's being technologically innovated is going to come from one or two sources, and it's going to be a top-down into the market type thing. So is there going to be a danger of that becoming another funnel thing of this is just going to be through one or two companies, or do you see more innovation where once it gets to the market, then more people could pick up on this product and spread it more widely? Because meat has a lot of variations to it. You just mentioned it. There's ground meat, there's steak, there's cut. I'm a foodie, so I could talk a whole different, you say steak, I think 30 different things, right?
Yeah.
Is that going to be an issue where it's just going to be like the Impossible thing? They do the one thing and stop, or does it get into the marketplace and expand through other variables, you think?
Well, I think that if we do it the right way, it would be more of a bottom-up thing. We allow for more competition in agriculture, and if we allow for more competition in agriculture, then I think we make room for these long-term investments. It's interesting. JBS, I think, is the biggest meat producer, I think, in the world. It's a Brazilian company, and they actually were producing these plant-based meats. They wanted to get into this, but they recently shut down their operation. And the reason for that is it wasn't making money. But I think they did it because they felt the pressure, the kind of the social pressure to get into this. And then it fizzled because it didn't work. It wasn't a good idea. So I guess my point is that these changes shouldn't be made as like social justice movements where we pressure these corporations to implement these new kinds of innovations, because they don't work. They usually are not that committed to them, and it's often just kind of a form of virtue signaling. Open up competition, allow for more competition in agriculture. That may initially mean that we are actually increasing the environmental impact, but over the long term, I think it will incentivize these innovations from the bottom up. So I would say it's the second thing. If we do it the right way, it's the second thing, where it kind of the bottom up, these long-term investments that a startup corporation might make, saying, "Hey, we can't compete with Smithfield on their beef. We just can't make those profit margins that Smithfield has because they're 200 times larger than we are. But what we can do is we can produce this cultivated meat because we've invested some time and energy and money into it, and then as it grows, the early adopters, early investors will allow this new product to become more affordable to the general public."
Yeah, Micah Safsten. Okay, you end your piece with the same place I'm going to end our discussion on this, because what really matters is if the consumers in the marketplace don't want this, don't accept it, and don't like it, it's not all the rest of this isn't going to matter in the long run. They got to make it taste. Look, I'm a foodie guy. If it don't taste like steak and I'm wanting steak, it ain't going to work. That's just the blunt part of it. How do they avoid kind of the faubles that some of the Impossible meats have got? Like you said, it's just unpalatable to a large segment of people. How do they avoid that? Because when you just start out calling, first of all, they're gonna have to brand it something other than cultivated meat, because that ain't gonna fly. Yeah. But what do you think that looks like if it's to be successful? And because look, even if you watch a Food Network show where they're judging, they're like, look, if it don't taste right and doesn't smell right, nobody's going to even get as far as eating the thing. How do we go from there on that when they get this stuff to the market?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think that there's probably kind of a tightrope they have to walk, where they have to make it taste like traditional meat. It needs to taste like, the cultivated beef needs to taste like beef. Cultivated chicken needs to taste like chicken. But at the same time, I don't think you can just say that it's beef or just say that it's chicken, because it's not exactly that. And so I think that you have to kind of market it as an environmentally friendly alternative. I don't think they should market it as a healthier alternative, because it's not. It's not. If it's going to taste like beef, it's going to have the same fat content as beef. Certainly there would be a leaner options and fattier options, but I think that you kind of have to walk that tightrope of being very similar to the real thing, but at the same time not pretending that it's the real thing, and maybe I think focusing on the environmental impacts, because for a lot of people that's a big deal, and they want to do their part to help the environment, and buying and investing in cultivated meat is a really good way to do that, because the impacts of agriculture on the environment are pretty substantial.
Any idea on a better branding name than Cultivated Meat? You got any idea there? Pitch me something.
I think.
By the way, while we're on the subject, naming the plant-based stuff Impossible was a bad marketing move just from the go. Just don't start out with something that's a negative connotation word of impossible. That was a bad idea. I understand what they were shooting for, but that was a bad idea from the go. So give me something good here. What do you got?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I think something like meat, or I mean, I think you probably have to break it down to beef, chicken, and pork. Maybe new beef or new chicken. New is I think probably has more positive connotations. Cultivated just sounds, that sounds too sterile. I agree that
too scientific to me. Maybe go back to Dogma where they did the Catholicism. Wow, we can do meat. Wow, or something like that. I don't know. We'll make it camp. Maybe make it campy and a cult thing, and see if it grows from there. Micah Safsten, fun conversation, because this is something that's going to pop up later, and we get a little bit ahead of it. Let folks know where they can keep up with you, what you're doing, how they can follow you, and what you normally eat on the average weekday, since none of us can afford this stuff just quite yet.
Yeah, you can just follow me on Twitter, Micah R. Safsten, Safsten. Just find me there. I mostly write about water in the West, and the water shortage, the drought, and free market solutions to that. And I mean, shoot, what I eat. I mean, one thing I'm really curious, and I think this is cultivated meat will probably come for this last, but I eat a lot of eggs, and I have a hard time seeing how they could replicate that. They're just about perfect. So
they'll be fine until they figure out whether they want to do the chicken first or the egg first.
There you go. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I couldn't help it. Micah Safsten, thanks for the time, buddy. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
All the music on Heard Tell is provided under a Creative Content license from monstercat.com.
Somos la máquina.